This is Kari Kampakis, and you're listening to the Girl Mom Podcast. Today's show is about a topic that's a pain point and a source of confusion for many girls and women today. We live in a world of extremes, and while some people struggle to set boundaries with hurtful people, other people will write off their friends and family members at the drop of a hat. They call everyone toxic, and they end up living a pretty lonely existence with very few relationships that last a lifetime. Neither one of these extremes is healthy, and neither one of these extremes is going to help us build the relationships that we crave and also need in order to become the best version of ourselves. Luckily, there is a healthier middle ground, a way to gauge the quality of our relationships, decide when boundaries may be needed, and keep a safe distance from hurtful people without making a major scene or burning bridges. Nashville counselor Kim Anderson is here again to help me unpack this topic and dive into this crucial conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a comment or a 5-star review wherever you listen and share it with your friends. Also, my new devotional for teen and college girls has officially released, so make sure and get your copy if you haven't already ordered it through the show notes. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy the show. Welcome back, Kim, and thank you so much for your willingness to talk about this topic that, like I said in the intro, I know is a pain point for a lot of families and moms today.
Thanks so much for having me. It is. It's such a difficult topic, and it feels like it comes up a lot lately, so I'm glad that we can jump into it and just kind of process it a little bit together.
Yeah, so, just as a counselor, I know you mostly see moms, but you also see girls as well. Mm-hmm. Is this a topic that you're seeing a lot in the counseling office? And are you seeing it more now versus even 5 years ago?
Absolutely.
You
yes.
are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, because if you think about social media and the way that it has impacted just the level of bullying or toxicity, so to speak, in relationships, it's just exponential in my mind. Mm-hmm. And, I always think about, what is the why? What is the why behind why we're staying in hurtful relationships with people? I just recently watched the new version of Mean Girls. I don't know if you've seen that or not. There's a musical movie, and I happened to see it on the plane.
Okay, got it. Okay.
And it just reminded me the way that we can allow bullies, so to speak, in our life stay present. Mm-hmm. And, there's usually a payoff. And the payoff is that there's a cost to standing up to the hurtful people or to removing ourselves from the hurtful people. And what we've got to decide is, what is that cost and, is it worth it?
Mm-hmm. And I do think that one, if you're looking at, there's a lot of different things that are driving this, but we live in a world and a culture where there's a real lack of empathy. Mm-hmm. I mean, even sometimes I just read comments on social media and I'm like, and it could be somebody has died or whatever and they're being ugly and rude. I'm like, who in their right mind would speak to somebody who just lost their spouse or their child and say these things? And the only answer I can come up with is one, you cannot have God in your heart if you're doing that. And two, just the lack of empathy that, somebody with any empathy, an ounce of it, would not be doing that. And I think as our world has gotten more narcissistic and sometimes just drifting away from God, that this is the fallout of a society like that. And so it's the reality of the world that we're raising our kids in. And one thing I've talked about in a new project that I'll be releasing later this year is just, how do you handle mean and hurtful people without becoming mean and hurtful yourself? Yeah. Obviously you want to have a thick skin, but still maintain a tender heart. And it seems like that's harder than ever to do sometimes in the world that we're living in.
And I think if we feel stuck in our lives physically, emotionally, relationally, it's harder to set those boundaries. But the truth is we do not have to allow hurtful people in our lives. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes people just need that permission, right? Permission to back away and to move away from those relationships. But typically, there's triggers that show up for us that keep us in those patterns and in those, dysfunctional relationships, so to speak. And so it also is our responsibility to take a look at that and, be curious about those triggers and what they need to be, how they need to be addressed.
Yeah. And I talk to a lot of girls, a lot of teenage girls, it's really sad that they, when they talk about, yes, I had some mean friends in 7th grade or 10th grade or 12th grade or whatever. A lot of times what they will tell you is that they think that's how friendship is supposed to be. Like, they don't realize a better way exists until they get out of that toxic environment and find real friends.
And I would say even adults, I
Yes.
speak with a lot of adult women who don't realize that they can have healthy friendships.
Yes.
And that the toxicity of the relationship, the drama of the relationship that they're in is optional. They don't have to be there.
Yeah, I agree. And, I always talk, we live in a world of extremes. And what I also see is, yes, there's one category of people that they tend to stay in relationships that they shouldn't stay in. But then there's also a category of people that they are writing off everybody left and right. And the fact is, not everybody is toxic. Yeah. Not every mean act is actual bullying. We're watering down the truth of the real situations when we categorize everything that way. But, one thing that I talk about a lot with girls when I'm doing talks is, you don't have to make a big announcement when you're setting boundaries with somebody. And that is something that this next generation is really struggling with and making mistakes with. Yeah. And I tell my girls a million times, do not burn bridges if possible with people. People will come back into your life. And I read a quote, it was a dad, it was a college girl who shared it, that her dad had shared it with her. And I was like, I want to do an article on this. It's something like the legacy of a relationship is determined by how you exit the relationship. And so in this day and age, a lot of teenagers in this next generation think, well, I want to be authentic and I don't want to be fake. So I'm going to tell her, that she did this. And so they will go, even moms, like some of the younger moms behind us, especially, very rude and ugly, and just the way that they just cut ties in relationships. And, even a teacher came up to me after a recent event, and she's like, what you said is spot on. She's like 25 years old. She goes like, I see girls, what they'll do is they decide they need to end a relationship with a friend, and they will send a laundry list, a text message with, you did this and this and this and this. And, we're like, you don't have to do that.
You don't have to. Well, it's always through text, right? I mean, that's
exactly.
Which always is problematic to begin with.
Exactly.
Because there's no context, there's no kindness, no compassion in a voice.
Right.
But it's either I need to tell you off through text and list all the ways that you have failed me, or I'm going to ghost you. And that ghosting is, I think, sometimes more painful because people don't have answers as to what they did. They're just dropped.
Right.
And they're just cut, if you're in, middle school, high school, you're just cut. You're cut out of pictures. You're not invited. You see your friend group gathering without you. And that is extreme pain.
Right. So we want to talk about, setting healthy boundaries with hurtful people. And I think one thought is just, you don't have to go make it, like I said, you don't have to go put it on the intercom. You don't have to make an announcement like, you are toxic and I'm cutting boundaries and I never want to speak to you again. Because again, how you leave a relationship is going to be the legacy of that relationship. So, somebody might be toxic, but, you're praying, from a spiritual perspective. You want them to be well. You want them to become a kind person, and you never know what God's going to do in anyone's life, our life or someone else's. And I talked to a girl recently. She said her grandmother always said that, every child, every teenager, every one of us, we're like a cake. And we're in the oven and we're not done baking yet. And I think that's a good perspective to be taken into our relationships, that we're all in different places. And yes, you might be ahead of somebody right now in your maturity or whatever it is, but there's somebody in your life that's ahead of you too that could be just as impatient with you as you may feel with somebody else. And so just keeping that in mind as we're setting boundaries, you can still love a person and wish well for them and want the best for them without hating them or begrudging them, or wishing evil to overcome them. I think that bringing the right heart into these situations kind of helps protect your peace and helps protect you as you feel like you do need to set some boundaries.
No, it's true. And we can do it kindly and we can do it firmly, but it's on us to do it. We have to be the ones to do it.
So the first thing we want to talk about is when you've decided that, you need to set up some kind of boundaries with the people. Let's start with friendships. That's the easiest place to start. When you need to set up some boundaries. And the first thing is to create some physical and emotional space. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that physical and emotional space is so important. We all need boundaries, right? And boundaries is the ability for us to take care of ourselves, even when it means disappointing and risking frustration from other people. I've read this quote one time, I'm not sure who said it, but not setting boundaries is like going outside when it rains and expecting to stay dry. And so boundaries protect our physical space, they protect our emotional space, and we do it not to change the other person, but to protect ourselves. Because like you said, we are all baking at different times. I love that metaphor. And so somebody just may not have the skills that you have at this point. And you don't have the skills that other people have. We are all doing the best we can. We are all growing at different rates in different time frames. But you think about the importance of boundaries. Even Jesus set boundaries, right? He had his inner circle of 3 disciples, and he had the 12, and then he had a larger group of followers. But he pulled away when he needed to pull away, and he went away and regrouped when he needed to regroup. And so similarly, we can have different levels of emotional intimacy in relationships. And I guess I would say not everybody gets to be in our inner circle, especially if they bring us down, if they are not serving us, if they are not strengthening us.
Yeah. And I think I saw a quote recently that I love. It said, "Forgiveness sets you free, boundaries keep you safe." And so I think that is good, is to start, you can forgive the person that's hurt you, but you don't have to give them total access to your life. You don't have to tell them your deepest, darkest secrets.
Yeah.
There's a way you stick to small talk. You can, don't give them information they might try to use against you. And, I guess as far as knowing when you need that physical and emotional space, let's just think of an example. Like, say you've always dreamed of having a catering business and you love to cook and that you feel like God has put that on your heart. Yet your best friend that you've had since 2nd grade is always teasing you about it, or she's telling you like your lasagna stinks, or like, and she does it in a joking manner, like trying to laugh it off. But you may laugh at it at the time, but then later on when you're reflecting on it, you're like, that was actually kind of hurtful. And then the next time you're going to bake your lasagna, you're feeling reluctant, like, well, she said it wasn't good, so now I'm reluctant to even go share it. That's hampering your dream. And so I'm not saying, we've talked before, we need constructive criticism in our life, but we want to get that from people we trust and people who truly love us and want the best for us. Like, there's a difference between helpful criticism and just criticism that's just trying to tear us down and make us insecure. And so unsafe people, those are the people that I think prevent us from doing what God is calling us to do, or the person we feel like we're supposed to become. Those are the hurtful people that might need some boundaries there. And so when you're talking about, emotional and physical space, a lot of it is just like you're protecting your emotions. You're not, that might be the person that you can talk about, college football, you can talk about homecoming, but you don't need to be talking about your dream of starting a catering business, because that's just going to give them space to get their little voice in your head that's going to, poke doubt at what you feel like you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that's a great example. And in those moments, I would encourage the woman who is trying to start the catering business to have a conversation with that friend, depending on the type of friend she is, right? If she's an inner circle friend, then she should be safe to say, hey, when you talk about my lasagna, it really puts self-doubt in my heart. Am I missing something? Because it could be that friend's jealous. It could be that the friend feels like she's going to lose time with her, right? And so with safe friends, when you open up that conversation, they step into it in safety instead of throwing a metaphorical grenade at you, like, what, you're just too sensitive, you can't handle it, I'm just joking. Those type of unsafe responses to you opening it up. So I have some dear friends where we've had these hard conversations with each other where we have unintentionally stepped on each other's toes. Right. But because they're safe friends, they can come to me, I can go to them and say, hey, what am I missing? My toe just got stepped on, right?
That's good.
And I know they're my inner circle friends because they can say, oh, I'm so sorry. I was just really stressed. I was really busy. Or maybe it was that I was reading into it. Again, back to texting. I read the text wrong. We almost always read texts wrong. We almost always read them harsher than they are. Right. And when we circle around in person, it's, never what we think.
Yeah. And it made me think, too, it could be, if the person's already an insecure person and they're trying to start a catering business, then they might be like overly sensitive to any little thing. Whereas the person saying that, you also have to look at the backstory. Like, maybe that's how their family is. Maybe they grew up in a family where they're kind of like snarky, and that's how they dig at each other.
That's their love language,
that's their
sarcasm.
Love language. Yeah, and they have a thicker skin, and like that comment wouldn't hurt them, but it's hurtful to you. But I do think, and that helps that person grow too.
Yeah.
You're helping them, like you said, by their response. If you say something like, and I think a good way to approach that situation was like, I know, I don't think you meant to do this intentionally. I think it's starting that way rather than you did this. I don't think you meant to do this, but that was really hurtful to me. I'm already kind of doubting my ability to start this business. And so while I do want some constructive criticism, just know that, I also need encouragement. It's really important, especially for me at this step of the process.
Yeah, this is how it lands with me. This is how it impacts me. I recommend starting with us, right? Like you said, give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm sure I'm overreacting or I'm sensitive to this, but help me understand, right? Lead with curiosity and compassion, because then they're not going to feel defensive. Like you're attacking them for being mean, right? When they didn't mean to be.
Right.
And that just softens the equation. Now, if in, said situation, this person, again, was like, well, that's your problem. You're too sensitive. Or, no, your lasagna is horrible, or whatever. Then you've now moved them in your heart outside that inner circle, and that's where they need to be. And so that's where you need to create this physical and emotional space, because we cannot pour into our most important relationships if we're giving our energy to hurtful people.
Yeah. So how do you do that if you're in a friend group with somebody and you need to create that physical space? How do you do that?
I think it's very subtle. Again, you don't want to drop a grenade on the relationship. You don't want to ghost. You just kind of find this dance where you start creating space and you're not as available, assuming this is a person that you've addressed it with, right? The Bible tells us to go to the person and talk first. If you try that and it doesn't work, then you slowly move back. And if they make it so difficult and they make it dramatic, then it might be that you say, hey, I'm just going to have to take some time. I've just got to figure this out. But I care about you, and, I know that we'll figure this out down the road, or maybe we won't. Maybe you don't even say that. You just let them know that this is just what I need to do. It depends on your your comfort level with that relationship. But what we're trying to do is get that space to be able to take care of ourselves.
And this is what, one thing I've always preached, and I have a lot of moms that tell me this has been so helpful. I've shared it with my daughters, as I've always told my kids too, like, cast a wide net. Be kind to everybody. It's okay to have your best friends, but don't let that stop you from having other friends. And I knew it was hitting finally with my kids when they come home. She's my friend from PE, or she's my friend from French class, or she's my friend from church. Like, have these friends in different places. And that way, if there is a toxic relationship or there is a friend that's doing it, it gives you a place to go. Because what happens with so many girls is they get so entrenched with one little group, and they don't make any relationships beyond that group. And then they stay in toxic environments because they have nowhere to go. And nobody will invite them in because they were so exclusive and cliquey to begin with. And so I think that that's just one of the many reasons to be, being friendly beyond your friend group and having those places to go, that if something blows up there, that's probably the easiest way I can think of. If this is not going well in this friend group, saying yes to fewer invitations, like maybe don't spend every Friday night with them. Like, I can't do it. I'm so sorry. And eventually they'll quit asking, if you really feel like you need some space, and spending more time with people that are healthy for you. And that's such an important skill to teach our children, because it's really a life skill they're going to need in middle school and high school, college, grown-up years, until they learn how to choose healthy friends and have healthy relationships. And it's sometimes by going through the bad ones, the bad relationships, that they learn what they want in a relationship, and not being scared to subtly step back. And like I said, I think creating that emotional space means, not giving them too much information. Like, I know as a mom, like, there are certain people I can tell just through conversation, even if I don't know them well. I'm like, I don't feel like her motives are very pure, or there's something about her I don't trust. There's just, these gut instincts, and that's really, I think, our intuition is something that we have as women that God gives us as a form of protection. And really tuning into that. And it's fine. It's not anything against that person. It might just be you and that person don't click. But you're like, she's not a safe person for me to totally open up with.
Oh, well, and that's it. You can tell, you get that inkling in your heart, and you just know that something feels off.
Mm-hmm.
And so trusting your intuition in that season or in that circumstance is so important. But it takes me back to what you were saying, about girls get so nervous about leaving their friend group because they haven't built those other relationships. And, it's scary to get pushed off the raft.
Mm-hmm.
We're all afraid of getting pushed off the raft. Even as adults, we don't want to get pushed off a friend group raft.
Right.
And the more seeds that we have planted, the easier it gets.
Yeah, definitely. And that really leads us to the next point as far as when we're trying to set healthy boundaries, is building a strong support system. And I really feel like when I look at teenagers today and the next generation, I feel like one of the biggest problems they're facing is that they don't have a strong support system. Mm-hmm. Even when they're in a friend group, it's not always a friend group that's going to be there for them in a crisis. They're not choosing their friends based on who's going to be there in the good times and in the bad times too. And a strong support system is also your family. But I think with the destruction in many family units today, I'm like, you can get through anything if you've got loving people by your side, and that's family members and friends. But a lot of young people don't have that. They've got a bad home situation, they've got a bad friend situation, and that makes it even scarier to leave a friend group. And so just encouragement for parents, if your child is needing to leave a truly toxic situation, you can't be scared. You can't be scared. You can't be, picturing they're not going to have any friends for the next 3 years of high school. Like, that's when we have to trust God. If you're doing the right thing and you're praying, he's going to take care of you. He's going to take care of your child. It might not be on your time frame or in the way that you want, but he will. And so, your child is never going to be their best self when they're stuck in a bad situation. Mm-hmm. And so we can't be scared. And, research shows, I've seen so much research on this, that the number one predictor for how well any child turns out is whether they've had at least one loving adult in their life who consistently shows up for them. So I know if you're listening to this podcast, if you've listened this far, then chances are you're that person in your child's life. And if they have you by their side as they're having to get out of a toxic relationship and regroup and reset and find healthier places, they're going to be okay. You don't undervalue what you're bringing to them, that security that you're bringing to them and that comfort, if you're not freaking out, because I think that's the mistake we can make as parents, is that we're freaking out and we don't want them to leave this group because you're friends with the parents or whatever's going on. But you've got to really trust it to God and do what's best for your child.
Yeah, we can't make it about us. And I think so often as moms, we can do that, like you said, but her mom is one of my best friends. How are we going to walk through this together? And so we keep pushing them into unhealthy relationships or unsafe relationships, or we're attached to their friendships in school and maybe socially engineer it because it makes us feel better. And so we've got to listen to our kids. And if we've developed a good relationship where they're open with us about that, it's our job to step in and support them, even though it's scary.
Right. And especially if your child is seeing it, that's such a gift, and realize that that's such a grace. It's much more stressful when your child's in a toxic situation and they don't see it, or they don't care, or they're not wanting to take steps to do something different. It's really a grace when they are making that decision too. And I think, one of the best things we can do as moms is to teach them how to do this with class and with dignity, and not being like, you're a terrible person, I'm just cutting off all ties, don't ever speak to me again, and just getting ugly and mean and vicious with it, which is what the world is teaching them to do, because the world's telling them to call everybody toxic. But, the same people that are telling our kids that, they're also the ones telling our kids that they should cut off their family members. So if you raise your child to just cut off all their friends at the drop of a hat, it might be a matter of time before they do that to you.
Right.
And so, relationships are messy, and it's a life skill to know which relationships are worth fighting for. And, a lot of times we do find out the true intentions and character of a person when you do approach them with love to explain what's happened or a way that you've been hurt and their reaction to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if a friend comes to me, like I said earlier, and tells me that I've hurt them, I immediately want to repair that.
Right.
And want to know, gosh, how did my behavior impact you? What could I do differently? Right. And so when somebody gets defensive and, protective, and isn't interested in reconciling or repairing, it's a sign again that they're probably not somebody that's worth investing your time in. But
Definitely.
it is hard. It's hard, especially in the season of life. If you've got older kids, where you're trying to find new circles. How do you find those new circles? How do I plant seeds if my kids drive themselves to school now and I'm not around the moms as much? And I just always encourage people to just get involved in community opportunities and just show up and plug in, serve, join Bible studies, right? Those are where friendships are made, and those are typically friends that are have this skill set of maturity. Not all of them, right? But that's a part. They're relying on the Bible for truth. They're relying on the Bible for wisdom when it comes to iron sharpening iron, and finding spiritually mature people that can support and guide us.
Yeah, and you're talking about they're having to set boundaries. It's one thing, some people listening, you might be trying to help your children learn how to set boundaries in their relationships, but there's also moms who have learned late in the game that, oh, wow, this relationship that I've had since high school is not necessarily the best. And, an example of that, too, is that, I have some younger friends, and luckily I was like, the gift in this is that you two have each other. They're both very grounded. They have their act together. They have their values right. But, they struggle because they're like, we're friends. We're still friends with our closest friends from high school, but we're all so different now. They're all in their 30s now. She's like, we get together at the lake, whatever, and all they want to talk about is, the wallpaper at their lake house, or just shallow things, basically. And she's like, we're not there. I'm staying home, so we're on one income, and we don't have a lake house. And nothing wrong with these things, but they're just in a different place. They're in a different season. And I was like, they just want to be good moms, and they don't care about all of the stuff that, their friends are taking all this time talking about. And I'm like, especially at this age, you don't have a lot of extra time to be with friends. And so I've learned I hate to say stingy, but I'm pretty stingy with my friend time. If I'm going to go take a trip with somebody, because I've spent weekends with people where I felt more drained and it didn't fill me up. And I'm like, I don't get a lot of weekends like this a year. And so you have to be protective of that time. And I think that's what setting a boundary looks like. Like maybe those friends might catch up with you. I'm like, things blow up in your 40s. I told them this. I was like, they blow up in your 40s. So a lot of people mature a lot then. And it might take something like that for them to reset their priorities and their values if this is what they care about most now. You're just ahead of them a little bit. So, but there might be a way you can still get together for dinner, but maybe you're not taking the big trips with them if it's not fulfilling, if you feel like you're on a different page, or it's not healthy for you. Or maybe in that situation, maybe you realize it's not healthy for you because you just feel jealous. It's just creating, like, I didn't think I wanted a lake house. I didn't think I wanted a bigger house until I get around these friends, and that's all they talk about. It's just very materialistic stuff. And it's not good for me because it makes me get angry at my husband for not making more money or not having a different job or whatever it is. Like, I think we need to be able to just evaluate what in our life, who is helping us grow in the direction that we want to grow in. And we can still be kind and loving to the other people, but maybe not giving them 80% of your friend time, and maybe giving them more like 20%, and knowing that that's not going to fill your cup.
Well, and it takes telling ourselves the truth, right? Being able to sit in that and say, gosh, I feel envy right now, and I'm noticing that. And a lot of times it's hard for us to name our emotions to begin with, and then to tell ourselves the truth, or gosh, this friend has been a friend of mine since we were, 13, and now we don't have anything in common. And it's grieving that and letting it be, right? Because a lot of friendships come along for a season, and they impact us, and they grow us, and then we take different paths, and that has to be okay too, right? We have to hold our friendships loosely and not hold them tightly and possessively. Right.
And know that there's a place for all of these friendships. The great thing, even if you and your friend are not as close at 35 as you used to be, there's something special that will always be special about those friends that knows your mom and dad, that knows your siblings, that grew up, that knew your family dog. Like, those friendships are priceless, just the history you share together. And that's a valuable, beautiful thing. And that can still be considered a close friend because of the history you share, but it might not be the person that you're sharing all the intimate details of your life with now as an adult, and just kind of knowing where to place those relationships.
One of my favorite things to do is to draw concentric circles. So start with a small circle and then concentric circles going out. So you've got multiple rings. And draw who are your inner circle people, right? Put them in that center one. And then who's in the next ring? And then who's in the next ring, right? And it really gives you perspective on who do I want to invest in? Who do I want to spend time with? Who do I value? And if you've got hurtful people or unhealthy people that are impacting you negatively in those inner circles, then it's time to think about how you might want to move them out.
Yes. That's awesome. Okay, and so the third way we've talked about setting boundaries with hurtful people is developing internal boundaries. Let's talk about that.
Right, so that's really just understanding our emotional triggers and what is going on in our nervous system, listening to our bodies. When I'm around this friend,
that's good.
Does my stomach hurt? Do I feel tense, right? Does my heart start racing because of what she's saying? And so, the Holy Spirit really guides us through these internal warning signs. And so listening to our nervous system helps us take care of our needs. But the thing is, nobody's going to do it for us. And that goes back to telling ourselves the truth. Nobody's going to set boundaries for us. Nobody's going to remove hurtful people from our lives for us. We have to be willing to do it. And it is awkward. Nobody likes being broken up with.
Right.
So we have to prepare for that. But again, it's putting our own self-care in front of the way that somebody else might feel about it.
Yeah. And let's talk about the tricky situations in life. Like, what do you do if it's a family member, if it's a sibling or your mom or your dad that you're having to set some boundaries with? Yeah. Like, let's talk about how do you evaluate when that is necessary, and how do you do that when you're still spending every Thanksgiving and holiday together?
Well, you might not spend Thanksgiving or holidays with them, right? That's the hard thing is...
and give some examples. Like, what are some examples of, like, this is a toxic situation that justifies some boundaries versus, I have an issue that, of people breaking off relationships, cutting off family members. And there's a lot of people in that generation behind us because of who they voted for. And I'm like, I have a problem with that. Like, I think it makes me sad for the people doing that. And I think, social media is kind of, there's a whole momentum there encouraging people to do that. But I'm thinking, who's going to be there if you have a crisis in the middle of the night? Who, if your child, because if your child needs to go to the ER at 11 o'clock at night and you've got to drop off your 3 kids somewhere, who's going to be there for you? And I see it as how the enemy is working in this world, that he is, trying to create division in family relationships over so many minor things. We've got family members who voted differently than us, but I know for a fact if any of us needed each other, we would drop everything and be there. Like, our bonds are not based on politics or stupid things like that. Yeah. It's so much deeper. And so I think that's an important conversation that people need to hear, because there's a mentality out there that, you just everybody's toxic. Cut them off. But, if you live long enough, you're not going to have any relationships left if you do that.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up. When it comes to politics, I strongly believe that relationships matter more than ideology. And I do believe that we live in a world right now that is making money on division. Right.
Yes,
that is, if you've ever seen Social Dilemma, it's a wonderful documentary that was produced years ago, but it really highlights the way that that advertisers, that investors even put money into our division, and a house divided cannot stand. So I don't recommend boundaries with somebody just because they have a different viewpoint. I think bringing different viewpoints together creates interest and wisdom, and we can't be in our own silos, only hearing our own messages, right? Again, it's like our relationships matter more.
Yeah, one thing I often think about, Harry and I went to lunch one time with a priest, and we were talking about relationships, and we were talking about the Greeks. And I remember one time I was at the beach with my father-in-law, and what you think about the Greeks, what you see in My Big Fat Greek Wedding, it's all true. They are so tight. They have these really strong bonds and family ties, not only just parents and children, but grandparents. It's an intergenerational thing. as a result, these kids are some of the most confident kids I see. Like, they really are, because they got so much of a support system. But they'll fight. And I remember one time we were at the beach, and there was all the relatives were there, and there were like 50 conversations going on. And it didn't faze me because I grew up in a big family, so I was used to kind of that chaos of a lot of things going on. But I think too, maybe my father-in-law and his sister were bickering over something, and Papu looked at me and he just smiled. He's like, "We Greeks," he's like, "we fight hard, but we love hard too." And I thought he nailed it. And so we were talking about that with a priest one time, Harry and I were, and he was saying, it really depends on what your relationships are built on. He's like, that's why the Greeks can fight and still, there are family members that write each other off, of course, but there are a lot, they can fight and still love each other. If there's somebody's in the hospital, they're going to be there. They drop everything. But it's not based, it depends on what the relationship is built on. And so I think that's why your relationships that are built in Christ, or, something built on something deeper than. And he used the example of, like, if your relationship with somebody is based on your kids play soccer together, well, when that soccer, 3 years later, when they're not playing soccer together, chances are your relationship can't last a fallout or something, because it's not built on something deep. And I think as we're trying to look for what are healthy relationships, what are the ones we want to invest in, it's got to be something deeper than, the house that you're building on the lake, or the wallpaper, or that your kids both play soccer, or that you both love just cooking for the sake of cooking. Like I'd say, you've got to have some deeper bonds and things, passions that you're really connecting over. I think to get through these hard times, and to know which relationships deserve to be fought for and which ones just need a little break through setting boundaries.
No, I agree. And I love that example. It's like when we build our house on rock versus sand, there's structure, and it can withstand the storms. And, when we're focused on pleasing or performing or, making somebody else happy, then we're going to have resentment in our heart. And so it's okay to disappoint people. And I don't think we celebrate that enough, right? Really, none of us want to disappoint people. When I talk about that in my office with clients, it's like, oh, no, I don't want to disappoint people. Who does? But we've got to be willing to disappoint people to have the house on a rock, right? To be able to say, this is who I am. You might disagree with me, but nevertheless, this is what matters to me. And so there can be room for disagreement. There can be room for debate. There can be room for fighting, like you said, in the Greek family, But at the end of the day, we have to be willing to disappoint people.
Yes.
And to let go.
Yeah. And so, talking about this last point of setting internal boundaries, that there's some people that, family members, or friends that, we all have got quirks, things like, well, that's just her. You take the good with the bad. So we definitely have that in our relationships. But then sometimes there are truly toxic relationships. And let's talk a little bit when that is in your family.
Yeah. When it's...
what is something, like I said, that justifies maybe setting those boundaries or not spending every holiday together? I think one that comes to mind, I met a girl one time, and she was talking about her mother-in-law, that she and her husband had to set boundaries with the in-laws. And I think the mother-in-law basically treated the son like baby Jesus, which I think is the number one problem I see, is what the number one thing I see boys do wrong. If you want to drive the girl away, treat your son like baby Jesus and treat her like she's not good enough. And a lot of moms do that. And she was even talking about how she has shellfish allergies. And so she's like, I had just had a baby at the hospital, and her mother-in-law brought dinner, this big shellfish dinner for her son, but didn't even bring food for her. Not only that, but brought shellfish, knowing that the daughter-in-law has shellfish allergies. She was like, those are just the kind of little things that just the mother-in-law just had no clue, and just very critical. And, even the husband agreed. They had to set some boundaries because they tried to talk to her, and she just wouldn't listen.
And that's the problem, right? Our job as parents is to receive our children's feedback.
Right.
Our parents is to listen, to hear, to modify.
Yes.
Right? If it was maybe, let's give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she forgot that this woman had a shellfish allergy.
I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry.
Yes.
I will never do that again. I am putting a note on my refrigerator that she has
Yes.
It's the countenance. It's our spirit. And so the toxicity comes in when a parent is not willing to repair.
That's good.
Right.
I like
and
that.
when a parent gets defensive, when the child says, hey, this is how you're impacting me, this is how you're impacting my family, right? So an example would be, this happens all the time, that a client's family say they host Thanksgiving, and they've got a sibling that comes over and drinks too much and then gets inappropriate and belligerent or whatnot, right? A very healthy boundary is, hey, we'd love to do Thanksgiving with you, but it won't work if you're going to be drinking, right? And so you get to decide, do you want to spend Thanksgiving with us or not? That's up to you, right? So see how that's a firm boundary. It's a kind boundary. They're not judging him. They're not saying you're a drunk every time you come over, you drink too much and you're rude. They're just saying, this is what works for us. You get to decide.
Right. And I think preempting those conversations whenever possible is so good, because then you're not like pointing a finger, you did this. It's just like, hey.
Yeah. And it's likely that brother-in-law or whoever it is, right, that comes over to the house is not going to receive that well, and maybe they won't come.
Right.
And that's sad, right? We have to grieve. But on this side of heaven, all of us have sin and all of us mess up, and we have to be able to have those hard conversations and really to get away from hurtful people, right? To move away from hurtful people, to help our kids move away from hurtful people. We have to be able to have hard conversations.
Yes.
And that's the problem, is we're not really trained how to do that in this world.
Yes.
And so we either grew up in a home that maybe, threw plates at each other,
right,
or one that never talked about problems at all and stuffed them under the rug. And so good, healthy boundaries look like, I'm communicating what works for me, so I don't have to have resentment in my heart anymore. And then you get to decide what works for you. You want to go in the neighborhood and talk to all the neighbors about how horrible I am? Okay, that's up to you. I'm not going to do that, but I'm also not going to let you into my heart.
That's good. I love that. And I do think it's a good mindset to take into it, a good spirit, like we were talking about. If you do feel the need to do this, is a priest one time, I was debating. I had something like, it was a friend that was going through some stuff, and I was like, I feel like I need to go talk to her parents because she needs help, but I was scared to do it because I'm like, I don't like doing this. I like being the cheerleader friend.
So much more fun.
It's so much more fun. I don't like being the hard conversation, but this is spiraling, and I could just see it was not getting better. It was getting worse. And I called my priest and I was asking him for advice, and he goes, that's not love. He goes, I tell people all the time that have a relative that's an addict that they don't want to say anything or they're scared to hurt their feelings. He's like, that's not love. He goes, love wants what is best for a person long term. And that has been so helpful to me because, okay, so say that situation you're talking about, the brother who drinks too much and does all these, stupid things when he does, you want him to be healthy. And, he's not on that path to health right now, and he's not seeing it in himself. And, I have friends who have done AA, who counsel people in addiction, and sometimes they will tell you that if you've tried everything, then there comes a point that, I had somebody advise me with a friend, she's like, you got to drop out of her life. And it felt like the meanest, cruelest thing to do. And she's like, but the addicts that are healthy will tell you that there comes a point where they may have to hit rock bottom and lose everything. They may have to lose the relationships they value most for them to have that come to Jesus moment. And, a lot of times they might kind of go find the friends who will accept that behavior, but those friendships are going to let them down. And, you just hope for their long-term good and health that they will see the light and that you will be waiting there. But in that sense, I think that we can see boundaries as a loving thing. It doesn't feel loving when you're doing it. And I do think that's why prayer is so important, and like asking God, like, guide me through this, God. Like, I truly want him to get better. I want him to get help. I'm going to support him. If he's making those choices, we would welcome into our house, if he's trying to get better. But the road that he's on, I can't expose my children to this.
Well, that's the thing. It's such a dilemma, right? Because the cost of setting boundaries, the cost of saying, hey, in a kinder way, basically, you're not welcome at Thanksgiving if you're going to be drinking. That's a hard thing to do. But the cost of not doing it, think about the influence he's having on your children, right? What you're modeling, you're enabling. You're not doing him any favors, and you're definitely not doing your family any favors. And that is hard. And I think as Christians, a lot of times we want we avoid those hard conversations because we want to appear kind, and we don't realize we can do both at the same time. We can be kind and set boundaries.
Yes. And you've got to keep in mind, too, that a lot of people are going to take advantage of that Christian kindness. And, so say you are not setting boundaries with that uncle who's acting irresponsibly or doing things that he shouldn't be doing, and you keep exposing your kids to it because he's family. Just be nice to him, don't rock the boat. Don't be surprised if your daughter ends up dating somebody like that out of the kindness of her heart because she believes in him and she can't set boundaries. So you're teaching them life skills that they're going to need in their own life to be able to choose healthy relationships and know when to set boundaries with unhealthy people. And like I said, you can do it in a way that you still love them. You're not judging them because we all sin, we all mess up. But, healthy people, when they do go through a season like that, when they look back, they realize, I deserve that. Like, I needed that. That helped me get my act together. Like that, they will, the hope is that one day they will see that and thank you and realize that was love because just going along with it isn't love if somebody's on a bad path.
No, it's difficult, but it's essential.
Yes. And I just feel like that we're going to wrap this one up. I just feel like I want to end this one on a prayer because I just know that I just feel like whoever's listening today, I know that there's a lot of different stories, but I know that there's a lot of heartache out there. People are really struggling with, they love somebody. It might be a friend, it might be a parent, it might be a sibling or whoever. They love somebody, their child, but there's just something toxic in the relationship, but it's a relationship they truly want to repair. So I would just like to end on a prayer for any of you who are listening who need that today. Dear Lord, we just pray for the women and for the men and for the children and teenagers, whoever's listening today, and we just ask you to bring them peace. We ask you to bring them wisdom and discernment. We pray for you to fill their home with peace and just your love and your compassion. And God, we ask that you just give these listeners the spirit of discernment to know what is healthy and good for them and what is not. We ask that you just guide them with every step they take as they try to repair relationships or restore what's been broken. And God, we just ask that you open their hearts with humility to receive your love, your grace, and your mercy, to remember how gracious and forgiving you've been to us and to help us with the forgiveness that we need to show. And God, we just pray for these listeners to be able to build strong and healthy relationships within their home, within their family, and outside their family, and to give them the patience and the strength and the guidance they need to be able to restore what's been broken and to build what can be created anew through Jesus. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks again for listening, everyone, and thank you again, Kim, for being on the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Friends, thank you for tuning in today. I am so grateful to have you here. And if you enjoyed this show, please subscribe wherever you listen and leave a ratings or review so that other people can find these messages too. For links to my books, my social media, and my new community on Substack, check out the show links. Thanks again for your support and have a great day.